Did you
Or
look
like
at
stars, you sure you have to, yeah. No, it was the opposite.
the one that needed all the work to it?
For which one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, roll call. Here.
Brett McCarthy,
President.
Jamie Wolf,
Here.
Don Mattice,
Here.
Betty Harris Howard.
Here.
Rick Dory,
President.
Greg Stewart.
Right.
Jim King. He stated he was here prior, and I know Aaron indicated he is unable to attend this evening.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, first item on the agenda. Jim, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I'm here.
Can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you okay.
Thank you. Okay, first item is the acceptance of minutes from October 9th.
Chairman, I remember one edit requested. Maybe Brent McCarthy, not Brent McHugh.
Oh, you changed it.
If we could just change that.
I'm sorry, I used to know a Brent McHugh, that's probably why. I was looking.
That was a test.
Oh, geez, got it.
Well, but he's further down.
I do think.
I think he gets used more than once. Yeah, number 4.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Other than that, I would make a motion.
Might be easier to change. I hear a motion, do I hear a second? I'll second that. Discussion,
I'll not, because I was not here.
all in favor? Opposed? Next item is application reviews, and we have an application for renewal for case 24-022. Turkey Lane.
I apologize. This application is on the agenda this evening to be reapproved. It hasn't actually expired yet. It expires in November. But their timeline is such that they're not able to have a substantial start in time to establish that the permit won't expire. So it's the same project, same application. They've come in to extend the approval timeframe.
Yes, Glenn Walker, for the applicant, Acadian Energy. Happy to answer any.
You know, Mike?
No, I apologize.
Thank you. Glenn Walker, Acadian Energy, the applicant. Happy to answer any questions. So basically, this is, we're seeking a 1-year extension for the application, and the application that was previously approved.
I'll apologize because I didn't go through to review the applications in depth. I wasn't here during the first. I did read the statement, it said nothing had changed. Is the construction period still the same? I know you talked about doing it in late winter, early spring of 25, but is that the same schedule as proposed previously? From a state, from a year standpoint?
Yes, generally, assuming we don't have any unforeseen delays or run into, the inability to get equipment. We start February, that gives us plenty of time to get it done by end of year 2025.
Okay.
And avoid sort of winter conditions as well.
Okay. Any accommodations for silt fencing, erosion control, you've got frozen ground, you're trying to get loading, et cetera, so install.
Little outside of my area of expertise, but that would all be required prior to that. Typically, we're using mulch and waste wood for erosion control and stormwater management, et cetera, on our other sites. So I would assume it would be something similar. That would be stockpiled on site, and then when they did the site work, because I think there's a limited scope we can do site work. We clear trees pretty much anytime, but probably be waiting until it's until spring to use the actual clean or raging brother, so like.
Thank you.
My recommendation is just if you take action this evening, that you see if there's any public present, which I don't believe there is, there's no one online. And to make a motion to reapprove it with whatever the original conditions were that were attached, as part of the application.
Good.
Mhm.
Looking at the application. And page 1 of 4. The data doesn't make sense to me. Help me understand. Let's see, Glenn Walker signature with 9/27/28 is the date. It's the very first page, 1 of 4.
You're right.
You know,
I'm gonna guess that's a typo.
it's a handwritten typo.
I'm not sure.
Where?
The signature.
His signature says 28.
Oh, I see.
Signature. This is his signature.
Ah,
Yeah, that's a.
post dating.
Yeah, yes, I can attest today, and we can get you a corrected version of that, or we can say that should be 2024.
Now, relative to the construction schedule, you have a timeline?
Hoping to start construction February 2025.
So you don't have timeline.
Well, we have a rough timeline, but we don't have specific timeline.
Is there any reason why we can't have that timeline?
I can provide the board with a general timeline for construction short. And I will base it on other projects that we're doing with, similar size and similar contractors.
And contractors are available for this time?
I hope so. Yeah, I believe so, yeah. Just a little backstory, the state of Maine has their solar program, and there's been some iterations to it with the legislation. Such that projects of certain size, above 1 megawatt had to have a commercial operation date of 12/31/24 to participate in the program. So leading up to that 12/31/24 deadline, equipment and contractors were very hard to come by. The expectation is that once we get through that period, things will ease up substantially. For example, Norwood Solar is building a project further up Turkey Lane. We at Norwood building another one of our projects over in Turner right now. But Norwood just spread pretty thin when we were talking about this project. So yes, we can correct the date on the application, and we can get you a construction timeline if that would please the board.
Any motion?
Well, I guess you mentioned that, and have you got a contractor, have you committed to them or?
We have not committed to a contractor, but we do have a contractor in mind.
So you don't know if they're gonna be available or not at this point?
We have fairly good assurances. I mean, we issued a notice to proceed to Norwich on another project in May, and they the year. So we're fairly certain we can get a contractor to build this next year.
Or a motion?
I can make a motion, that case number 24-022 Turkey Lane. Map 4 lot 37, case 24-22 consideration of request for Acadia Energy LLC, the Turkey Lane LLC. To reapprove the conditional use permit granted by the planning board on November 29th, 2023. For the installation of a 955 kilowatt AC commercial solar array in the rural zone located at 0 Turkey Lane on town map 4 lot 37. Be approved with the following conditions: that the signature of page 1 will be updated and the dates in the actual application will be updated.
Want to put in the timeline?
The timeline's in there, so they're just updating the dates to match the timeline.
Construction.
Right, and the application did say spring, so I was just assuming we update that by 1 year.
Right.
So just update those dates by a year.
Yeah.
And you'll, basically, it says spring of 2024, so February/whatever, spring of 2025. Update those dates.
I'll second that.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor? All opposed?
Hi, Jim, this is Jim, and I'm in favor.
You're in favor, Jeff?
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, who seconded that motion?
Me.
Jamie Brainerd, thank you.
Okay, next item is case 24-020. This is one, same. You're addressing that.
Fine, same issue, same applicant, so, Landmarker, Acadian Energy, addressing the one application for extension.
Jamie? Questions?
Nope.
No.
Greg?
I just wanted to make sure we had all our questions answered. I was reading through my notes on this, I can't remember, so I was hoping some of the other board members may remind me. We had discussed things like, whether we were going to be using, you know, equipment to grub out the stumps, or whether we're gonna grind the stumps in place. And I don't remember if we had a determination on that, and we discussed, I also had a note about the setback from the wetland, like, so if you're gonna grow up the stumps, how far from the delineated wetland you were gonna go? And I don't think that was, I don't know, I don't remember settling that, so it's possible we did. I know we had a number of conditions on it, when we posted it, but I think I just wanted to make sure, I guess, everybody was still happy with what we had, it seemed like the considerations on there, but exactly what they were gonna, what the, didn't seem to be spelled out in the paperwork I had, or at least on the online version I was looking at, so. I don't know if I've got a real articulate question, I'm sorry. It's more just a question, you know, we had a number of conditions on it. I guess I could just have the applicant who felt like those conditions could still be met. I think our preference was, you didn't have to, especially around the wetlands, is not to scrub out the stumps. Was to leave as many in place you could, and the ones you had to grind, but obviously you can't do that in the wetland itself, but outside of it, if you could kind of, and it seemed like it was one of the big things that I didn't quite have an answer to.
Okay, I'll try and take that, parts. I would say that if I don't recall specific conditions, but any conditions that were placed in the project previously, we would accept those, obviously. Or change those. In that regard, know that there was a subdivision amendment requested with those lots, so we had purchased 3 lots that were all lots to record, and the town had asked us to combine those lots. I believe that it has been done to satisfaction of the town. I know there was iterations back and forth, and I apologize if my engineer and surveyor satisfying your requirements. And I know that was there, and I just want to make sure we're good with that.
Yep.
We took care of that recently.
All right, thank you. And so I know that was outstanding, and then any of the other, environmental issues with respect to, limits of disturbance, grinding stumps, I'd just say we use best industry practice, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the state, I looked up, the state actually allows you to do both, right? You can scrub as well as grind. And I think we kind of discussed it, but I think at the time, we didn't have a direct answer of which one you were gonna do, and we just asked if we could try to keep it to grinding near the wetlands if possible, but I understand it's not necessarily, there's not a written condition that says you must at a certain distance, but it just asked if you, would make sure the contractor that was hired was at least trying to keep that to a minimum, keep the stumping to a minimum near the well.
At least invasive, or at least,
Yeah.
something like that, and I can appreciate that, certainly. Try to limit all disturbance if we can, sometimes it works better than others, but. Okay.
The reason for your extension request, we already talked about contractor availability to build the project. What about you all, lead items, procurement?
It's kind of the same thing, we rely on contractors to use their purchasing power for those types of things, so that, it would be contractor. What we do is we use what in the industry called engineer prepare construct. So we go one-stop shopping and we let them, decide whether it's gonna be the GE or Westinghouse, sort of, and CNC nice, Frenchmark. And used to build in big gas plants. And so I think we should be able to figure that out again next year as things slow down. And it became, this year was really hard, just because I think everyone was trying to hit that 12/24 deadline. We're finding it now, trying to get subscribers to these projects that, people aren't making their obligations just because it's, everyone is trying to hit that finish line. And the expectation is next year will be slower or easier than how you want to describe it.
Thank you.
I miss anybody, Don? Yeah, any questions? Did I cover everybody? Okay, I'll entertain a moment.
I'll go again.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Greg.
Page 24-20, consideration of a request for Glenn Walker for signs/AE Winona Drive LLC to reapprove a conditional use permit granted by the planning board on November 29, 2023 for the installation of a 995 kilowatt AC commercial solar array in the rural zone located on Winona Drive on Town Map 2, lots 6. That may have to be correct, right? Because we merged those lots. So, we'll say the applicant says 6I, J, and K, but that has been combined. I would say be approved with the condition that the applicant's permit will update dates similar to the previous discussion.
Second that one too.
And including the date on the.
Yeah.
Yes, the signature and the date of the processing of the work.
Okay.
Second. Sorry.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Oh,
This is Jim. I'm in favor.
thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don, I will work with you, for
If we can do that via email, the documentation, that should be all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Good night. Site plan regulations.
Okay, next item on the agenda is a workshop, discussion of site plan regulation.
I just want to make a quick observation about this process. So we didn't do a findings and fact on those applications, but in the future, we'll have a finding and I will reference that finding in conditions. So if you guys were searching for some information, it wasn't all accumulated into one notice. So in the future, that will be available to you. So it'll be easier. I don't know if you get renewal requests often.
Uncommonly.
No? Really?
Yes, renewal, no.
Yeah, they don't let them expire probably. Yeah, the industry specific.
Now this stuff too, like if he has to come back in another year. what do you do? Like, would we have to be like, you need to redo your decommissioning and has anything changed on the, yeah?
Yeah.
Cause that's a long time.
Only extended in time.
You can extend it one time. I mean, if they come in and reapply, if they meet all of the criteria, the ordinance, you're obliged to reapprove it.
Mhm.
But if the regulations have changed, they are then subject to whatever the current regulation is.
Okay.
So nothing had changed in this instance, but it could occur, and I've seen it happen where the regulations do change.
The next workshop is starting, before we go there, we have an update on,
I will give you an update. I have yet to put together a memo that's in my agenda for tomorrow because I've been out of the office for a few days. That goes to the council, and I wanted to run that by you first, Rick, before I send that to Anthony, and I made him aware of that. So just a summary of the status and what the recommendation is, and then the document gets attached to that. So I'm gonna run that by you, and then that will go to Anthony and the council, and they will put it on the next available agenda at that point. Additionally, the same status with the fee schedule. I'm gonna put those together at the same time. So you all have looked at the land use fee schedule. I'm hopeful that they'll do it at the same meeting. I'm gonna submit them together.
all right, so moving on to workshops. Okay. Right. Wait. The 7th. Is that correct?
Correct, that was the idea. And I did bring, I'm not sure what documents people still had. I had handed out at one point, and I'll pass this around if you have it already. You don't need to take it.
Can we just take the top one? Is that what?
Yep, you can just
Okay.
take the top one, and what that is just, each page is a zoning district and the description of the district in the 2024 comprehensive plan. In the current zoning ordinance, and then the uses that are allowed in each district. So just to have a snapshot of each district as opposed to the table. It's the same information, just cut and paste.
And what are we doing with this again?
That is, so you at a glance, so you can have at a glance, you have your ordinance has information, and you have the comprehensive plan, but I just put them in one spot.
Gotcha.
I also have copies of the changed ordinance that we just talked about going to the council and the current definitions. So this is information that you've had at different points, but just in case some people didn't have it with them.
Same one we got last.
Correct. Yeah, and
I
then
need that.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you.
Does anyone else need a copy of that or want a copy of that? This is just what was posted. And then if you have your zoning ordinance with you, then you have the definition section, but I did bring some extra.
That's in this new one.
The new one does not have definition changes, so it was not in this.
Oh, okay.
In your existing zoning ordinance.
Got my other paperwork.
Yep, so that's why I brought it up.
What page is it?
Page 60.
Okay.
Before we take this off, I just wanted to, I read through some of the requirements in site plan review handbook. Look at the Dobbins plan, and we do not want to use. We violation is funded, it is incredibly fully written. I don't even want anybody to open it, so take it, throw it in the dumpster, please. It's that bad. It was really, really bad. Yeah, I mean, they repeated themselves. They said, oh, there's these, 18 conditions. 3 of the conditions were the exact same condition
Really,
of the 18.
Which one did you like the most?
Well, I mean, the state plan had some really good information. The example that we had from Yarmouth, we don't want to use.
Okay.
It's all. Yeah,
It's got a nice model
Oh, well,
that you could.
it was.
And then Booth Bay Harbor was the other, Hallowell, Booth Bay Harbor, and then Yarmouth, just because it had been mentioned previously.
Right, I mean, we discussed Yarmouth, and I think, that was the one I just kind of said, wow, I can't believe this is actually an act.
I did it through by the time of the year.
Oh, wow. It was
Bad, that's doing standards in it.
I didn't write it.
No, I didn't write it. I helped make some clarifications in it, but
Well, and I think, and the other thing is if we go down the road of that, I want people thinking that, we can expand essentially what we're doing here. But in all the plans, it seemed like there was a lot of their ordinances that were repeated. And we want to be careful doing that rather than just referencing our ordinance document, because once you repeat it, well, then if we do our ordinance update, well, then you got, you're referencing the wrong document. It becomes this whole circular thing. You got to remember, oh, you know, that, or if you put it in your ordinance, the only thing you have to do is update the reference, not necessarily update all of the verb. They were copying it. So it wasn't referencing the ordinance. They were just taking sections of their ordinance and putting it into the site plan. Like, so it's listed twice, and that just seems like a really bad practice,
I agree.
where you could really get yourself into two sets of rules and guidelines.
I'm hopeful that by having a company codify the ordinance, and I've mentioned that any number of times, that they will help the way that the software that they use and the way that it's set up on the web pages is that there's much less of a chance of error, because they're going to be overseeing the process, and that whole cross-referencing
Okay.
is a big part of what they do. 'Cause there's a lot of room for error there.
The site plan,
Is that the one?
this is the state,
Okay, that's what.
yeah, the state one. There's the other examples. The examples were online. I looked at those at home. I don't have those. So
Okay, thank
I
you.
got them on my phone.
Did you send those to us?
They were attached, they were linked to the,
They were all electronic.
yeah, they were electronic, and I just said if anyone wanted printed copies, I could get printed copies. I didn't really think that you probably be studying them, and
So, and
I've been giving you a lot of paperwork lately, so.
what about the exam?
Okay, so I have some different examples of a project or someone making a general inquiry. And then if you all use the existing regulations, now you have, just make sure everyone does have the definitions and the current language. Some of this is what I had spelled out some questions in prior documents for workshops, and then I have one that actually came in today. I have a realtor who's waiting for a telephone call because there's a property in the general residential district. It's in the village area. Bear with me for just one moment because I put some notes together. So in the neighborhood of like Greenwood, Hanson and Green, if I have that correct, there's a property there that they wanted to know what they could promote it as, because it is limited residential, but I'm sorry, general residential, but there are commercial uses that are permitted. So what I'm going to tell them is that they're going to need to probably have prospective buyers contact the town on a case-by-case basis, because you can't spell out everything that's permitted or not permitted. They really need to reach out. But it felt like a good exercise to see what the board feels is permitted there based on what we have now in the table of uses. And this property currently has, or it had a 2,682 square foot office set up in the existing building. So they have some parking, they have a dwelling unit in there, and they had what had been being used as office space. It didn't look like it had ever come to the planning board for approval. I don't think that it is illegal or non-conforming. I think that it lapsed, the use lapsed for more than 12 months, and what the ordinance says, this is Mark's interpretation today, is that because it didn't come in under the current ordinance and meet those criteria, that they would, in order to reestablish that use, they do need to come back for a conditional use permit. So really, any commercial use is going to need to come back in for a conditional use permit. They had been using it previously as office. So my feel is that they really need to reach out with specific uses, which is kind of, what you had stated in the past. So now I'm going to start getting, I assume, or Mark's going to start getting phone calls about what they can do there. So that is general residential.
I did just scan through the examples of the other towns. Hollowell's is really, I copy and paste that, nice and organized, easy to read. Yeah.
They said it were. Citing where you have.
Mhm.
They present that, and I think the batch on everything that's there now. And before they move forward with design and spend a lot of money on it, planning board essentially gives them a stamp of approval, and say, yes, you know, what you're proposing and what we can see here, go ahead and propose, develop your project, then come back to this,
Mhm.
which I think is,
It's similar to what we want.
Right.
Exactly,
That's what both.
It's almost like a
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly,
And it spells out exactly what they've been doing for,
yeah,
that way they're not spending all this money coming to us and saying, no, you missed the boat on us.
So are we able to take that example you've got right there, which is a real one?
Yeah, this,
To,
it's,
Exercise,
yep, I was just looking for, bear with me for just a moment. Maybe I passed all the copies around. I had that, were there any more of this,
there's another one here.
You can use mine.
So this is the district here. So general residential.
The low or medium impact commercial uses.
Yeah, so this, here's an example in my mind that I was thinking, is this in the intention? You can have medium impact uses up to 2,500 square feet of retail. That could require 16 spaces, parking spaces, plus one per employee. So you're talking about 2,500 square feet of retail, but you're also talking about an expansive pavement, you know, parking, lighting, all of that goes with it. And it being so broad, is that intended that that is the type of thing that is permitted in that district? Because I was having a hard time in picturing that in the neighborhood in which this particular property is located. So if someone contacts me, they will come to you. But when people are looking at properties and doing due diligence, they've, you know, the schedule of the planning board and their schedule of when, you know, making offers and that may not line up. And so it would be good for me to have a sense. And it's,
try it. Greg, I'm gonna ask you, that's true that,
Sure.
so we all understand.
Yep. Yeah, the way I would interpret that is to say, you know, for 2,600 square retail space. So, and I would say, you know, based on our impacts on page 60, you have low, medium, high impact. And low is specifically lists off, medium actually has a side. So with sides, it says, you know, the retail sale left is 2,500, which would be pretty easy to do with the building at 2,600, say shrink it down to 2,500. Now your medium impact. Again, John would say, you know, okay, there's all these parking requirements, lighting requirements. If we're going to give them a conditional use permit, they're in the medium size, 2,500 square feet of retail space. You could argue whether that's retail or maybe it's a law office, maybe it's a doctor's office, maybe it's something else, but you're gonna need adequate parking. That doesn't get waived. I think our existing example meets that. I think you need adequate lighting because there's nothing to say, you know, December it's dark at 3:30, so they're gonna need lighting. And then from our ordinance, we would then look at that property, if it's on a little tiny lot and they're gonna have to have lighting and there's houses around it. We would maybe have to make an assessment based on our 14 items in our conditional use, the impacts to the neighbors. So we say, is this gonna impact the traffic? Is this going to be, do they have an adequate lot where they can still build the parking, pave the lot and still have enough impervious cover to meet our standards? So they're kind of reinventing and you say, oh, it's a grandfathered lot. Well, that doesn't mean the use is any longer grandfathered. So we would have to make an interpretation of, is that use grandfathered? Does it meet the neighborhood? Does it meet the stormwater requirements? Does it meet all of these other steps? But as far as the commercial, it's a very simple, you could move into the medium impact, which again has the parking is what's laid out, the signage, what's laid out, those are already kind of defined for us. So for me, in that case, say that property, that's what we're looking at. Now, if they were to say, okay, I'm specifically going to be building a barber shop, beauty shop, hair salon, which are listed in low impact. You know, what does that mean? You don't have a size listed there, which can sometimes be a limiting, but I want to take your attention down to the table on the bottom. Hours of operation, impact to abutters. So impact to abutters, it says none, not slight, none or low, and it says 8 hours. Do you guys know a lot of beauty shops or barber shops or hairstyling salons that are open for 8 hours?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of them are open 9, 10, 11 hours.
Exactly.
So if they're gonna keep if they're a one person salon, small salon, they're probably going to be low, they could be low impact.
Mhm.
So say they have 2,600 square feet, but they're only gonna use 500 square feet, okay. That would be possibly a low impact, so we have to walk through that. So the only size limitation is on medium. So if it's over 2,500, it goes to high. If it's less than 2,500, it immediately starts at medium, but can it fall into low? There's a specific set of uses there, and the table on the bottom gives us kind of an indication that there's no impact to the neighbor, and that it's gonna be 8 hours or less. Those two conditions are gonna say, what type of business is this? And it's unlikely they would be utilizing 2,500 square feet and be open only 8 hours with no impact to the neighbors. So it's likely this is gonna fall in the medium. So I just wanted to walk everybody through full circle. The way I would read this is that project would be 99% medium impact, unless they said, we're only gonna use 500 square feet and we're gonna put apartments out back, or something like that, where they weren't gonna utilize that size space.
Is there an hour plan on the hours of operation?
Yes, so for commercial use, low impact is 8 hours, medium is 8 to 10 hours, and high is 12 hours.
Could be from 12 to 8,
Could be,
but then it might have an impact.
well, and then that's where you have impacts to the abutters.
They have to move.
You know, that's an interpretation, it's open to interpretation, impact to abutters, none. That's pretty definitive. And if there is some, then it's moved into medium. Now, medium has different requirements than low. But low impact is the only thing that they potentially Mark could approve without us, right? That's what the table says. So if it's medium, they have to come to us. That's really the only difference here, is that they would have to get a conditional use permit. And they have to meet the parking standards no matter what. And if the lot's not big enough, if the lot's not big enough, but the parking they would need. And that depends on the square footage. So if they only utilize 2,000, they need a smaller number of spaces. If they only utilize 1,500, they need even less room. So the size of it dictates, based on our parking ordinance, how many spaces they need. Is what they're utilizing. So that's where we have to say, what did they intend, are they intending to use the whole property?
Right.
Or are they intending to use part of the property? And they may end up falling in high. They say, hey, I'm gonna have a lot of lights, I'm gonna have a lot of parking, I'm gonna utilize this full 2,600, and this is what I'm going to do. That could fall into, it could fall into the high. But I think,
hours a day, you would.
yeah, well, if it's over 12 hours a day, it would, and then it's significant impact to the neighbors. Or butters, I should say. But that's the way I would interpret it, Rick, when I was kind of evaluating this. And I feel like we have the flexibility to do that, but I do understand that it does leave it open to interpretation. But no matter how much of this we write, I'm just being clear, it's gonna be open to interpretation, period. So it's a question of, do we wanna have something like Hollowell has, which would say, come here for a pre-meeting, let's have the discussion before you go and make that a requirement. Right now, it's not. It's a good recommendation, go and can talk to them, but they could spend the money, do the engineering and come in and say, hey, I wanna do this. And then we're like, no, we don't agree with your interpretation. And then we're in a battling type situation because they didn't wanna do the pre-approval. But again, in this case, if they came to us, it's easy, it's high impact because it's over 2,500. If they came to us with a plan and that we had to make that determination, it has to be high impact.
And it is what it is.
And it is what it is, because they didn't come for a pre-meeting. Because it says right there, medium impact is 2,500 or less. So it's automatically, no matter what their hours of operation are, no matter what their butters are, what the impact of the butters are, they are automatically in high.
So we should have them.
Again, I like the idea of the pre-meeting because I think that's what we were, it's not only fair, it's making sure that they're not investing a ton of money.
Right.
And resources in a final plan, when, okay, hey, it's 2,600, if you guys make it 2,500. Based on what you're telling us, we'll make this medium impact. That could be changing how they would potentially write this up and develop it.
The folks out on the solar farm, they did the same thing, they came and asked us to preview their.
Yes.
property.
Yep.
They chose to do that.
Right.
But
I will say that I really like the whole coming in prior to and actually having a sketch discussion, because sometimes people come in, they really design the project, right? But they're gonna come in and ask for your input. They really, it's, the idea is that they've not vested in a certain design and paid engineers and, you know, put in soft costs. So I really like that. That would alleviate a lot of the concern I have about at the staff end of trying to assist people. Because that expectation is out there, that the board's gonna have that
Just
discussion.
had two projects. They're shoreline zoning. They did all the work on, it, and we reviewed them, said, you need to go look at it again.
Well, even remember the guy with the self-storage?
Yeah.
And he came in, just wanted to have, it was a good thing he did, because if he came with plans, we would have been like, oh, there's a lot that you didn't do that we would have wanted you to do.
Well, even Lopers came in with the same.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
they're gonna perk cover. I don't even think we can allow that. That would have to go to the Board of Appeals. Because they need a variance to exceed that. We can't approve that. So in my mind, I would say we could approve that because they're saying you want 60% impervious cover, like, you can't do that, it's 50. That's all we can do. So you have to figure out a way to make it 50.
They talked about a waiver, but I didn't know where that
Well, that
was.
would have to go to the Board of Appeals. That's.
That's
you know,
where the
variance-
waiver, that's the waiver they're talking about.
From the.
Oh,
from-
I was so confused that day. I was like, what waiver is everybody talking about?
Right.
They meant go, you meant go to the
They
board.
would have to go to the Board of Appeals
Oh.
and say, you know, can they get a variance? To take that 50. to
I
60?
thought whoever was explaining it to me was saying that we can waive it, and I was like, where does it say that?
No.
Okay.
They would like us to, but I
But
don't think
no.
we can.
Could the
Okay,
Board of Appeals actually waive that? Wouldn't that have to go to
I mean, they'd have to have they'd have to have a real reason, like it wouldn't work, or it's a danger to people, otherwise they're not gonna approve it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can't speak for the Board of Appeals, how they would vote. You know, if they were arguing that there's all that green space next to 202. So just because it's not their lot and that kind of thing, I would say, you know. I would suggest to them, don't keep that property next, they had enough property if they merged the two. They were keeping that house next door,
Right.
they would have merged the two and discontinued houses of use. Merged the two, they would have had enough land to do the project as designed. So it's up to them to make that determination, how they wanna make the changes, and they could go to the Board of Appeals, because I think it would be a hard sell, but. You know,
meet the criteria.
yeah, it would be tough, because it is, that those numbers do kind of align with where you're talking about where TE gets involved in. To utilize green space that's in a right of way that at some point DOT could actually use. Probably that's a bad idea, I mean, we hope 202 doesn't turn into a 4-lane each way highway, but the right of way is there for a reason. So, you know, give them the flexibility to move that road as needed and make that impervious cover.
Just days, I think it's.
So you can't borrow against something that's not yours, but they had the access to the other property that they could have utilized if they wanted. Or made the store smaller and been able to have less parking. Those are their choices.
We're okay with that again, you have another one?
Yep.
Thank
So that is one, so people are gonna be, my response to the realtor is that it's really gonna be more by case, because it's not black and white, and so I may be getting general inquiries on that, I may have instances where people coming board, we'll see, they may make it into another housing unit. But that's, the question is, what can we do? That's the crux of it.
Don. Delphi seconds, Chairman. So we've gone through that example with our existing ordinance. How would that process differ if we had site plan regulation, an ordinance for site plan regulation?
Well, part of the thing when we were talking about site plan was, I was talking about table of uses and definitions as a first step. And it was determined that we didn't want to define everything and categorize it, that what we had existing was adequate. And so this is not really addressing site plan so much as it is what's permitted where and how is that determined. So with the site plan regulations, depending on what the board decided it applied to, commercial uses, is multifamily going to be considered a subdivision, or is it going to be reviewed under site plan? Currently, it's subdivision because that's the regulation that we have. So that's a separate step of making sure it's clear what's allowed where, and then what does the site plan apply to? So there.
you. units. What I hear you saying, we had 4.9 definition for modification, what are the right terms? You could do a better job with whoever is coming in for application, with steering in the right direction versus all of it ending up in our case review or preview. That's what I understand.
I feel like I could give them more direction. I'm not the ultimate interpreter of the ordinance.
Cause doesn't Mark usually, sorry to interrupt,
Yep.
doesn't he usually field all of these?
I've been getting quite a bit of them. I think his store has.
Okay,
But that's not always the case now. When they come in there and they want to do a commercial activity, they're gonna have to go to the planning board
right.
in the instances that I've been approached on. So I
So
feel at
stuff
times like
that-
I've not been able to give strong guidance.
So, okay, so if something comes in that doesn't need to come to us, that just goes purely to Mark. Mark takes care of it. If it's anything, then he passes along anything that might need to come to the planning board. Okay. Okay,
And any conditional use permit, any control, those have to come.
yeah,
So the site plan is essentially your conditional use permit process that you have now. It'd be one or the other. And they both have, application requirements, materials that are required to be submitted, noticing requirements. It's very similar in terms of process. Whatever that process is, it could be the same for a conditional use or site plan. It just has to be clearly established, which have a process now for conditional use.
Mhm.
And then the site plan, I called out it currently in your ordinance, in your zoning ordinance, you have performance standards specific to visibility at corner lots, erosion control, nuisance conditions, which is noise, vibration, smoke, odors, heat glare, radiation, waste disposal. In a general sense, that they're to be minimized, so that it doesn't impact abutting property owners. Off-street parking and loading, the ordinance speaks to number of spaces, aisle widths, dimensions, handicapped accessible, surface drainage, lighting. There's a reference to 40 square feet per space. Is required to include pedestrian access, safety for pedestrian and landscaping in the parking lot. So there's a lot of general references to some specific things, and then construction requirements. There's a drive-through. We talked about drive-through businesses previously. I talked about drive-through restaurants. There are some provisions around queuing in the design of for drive-throughs. Sanitary, stormwater, water quality protection, there are provisions in there. And then you have specific sections to home occupations, livestock and poultry keeping, mobile homes, mobile home parks, multifamily dwelling units, accessory dwelling units, mineral exploration, you have the separate ordinance for. Campgrounds, individual private campsites, roads and driveways, essential services, agriculture, soils, archaeological sites, and then the shoreline standards in addition to those, because you moved a lot of that out of the shoreland into the general ordinance, so applies across the board. And then there was the standards that still remain to be just shoreline. So there are definitely provisions in the ordinance. They're not very specific. So in my mind, the site plan extends those areas, potentially additional performance standard criteria. It spells them out more specifically.
So we don't run into a problem with, well, you didn't tell me. It's not written. It's not.
The hardest part for me that I keep back to is, they want to see it. Well, what do I do? How do I design it? And then what's the angle? What's the percentage? And I don't have that.
so would you just saying you need to just come in and talk to the board then before you,
Precise.
and then we can decide that, so you don't have to decide that stuff?
Well, the thing is that it has to be consistent. You can't make up the rules as you go for different applications. It has to be consistent, so that there has to be a set of rules. The rules right now are it's not that there aren't some protections, they're very vague, which in my mind, it makes it difficult for you all to apply consistently and to be able to say in advance what they are. So if an applicant comes in and they want to make application, they need to know what are design standards.
Okay, go ahead and second.
Well, can I say something? So with the goal that we're looking at, what conceivably could happen down the road if any of these end up in trouble?
That is the concern I have, is not with everything up until today.
That, they just,
It's
never
the-
all, locked up,
It's,
See, I'm more on the other side of, I'm concerned we're gonna get in trouble if we define stuff too much that we don't know and we haven't seen. And then we're like, psh, it's in there, we have to let them do it. How do you not let them do it? Because
You
we've
don't,
already
you have
defined
to
it.
do
We
it.
didn't realize the huge issues of what this is gonna be. I'd rather protect what could go really, really bad as something we really didn't want in our town. Because we had already defined it and we didn't realize all the problems.
even
You
more
know what I
than,
mean?
I do know what you mean. So even more than the use, like if we just forget about, so drilling down so specifically on the use, you want to protect property values and the character of the community, the environment. So the performance standards, that's what those for. And again, you have quite a few of them. They're just not very specific. So, I mean, ultimately, if someone could say meet all of the performance standards, wouldn't really matter what the use was, right? Because the impact is going to be negligible, hopefully, ideally under your standards if they meet them all. So it's really more about the design and the potential negative impact to be mitigated than it is the actual use.
Okay, go on, street. Look at each other. Test the books. We need to move on. This debate, we have to.
In fairness, we're only comparing it to our process now, not how this would be reviewed under the site plan process. Which I thought.
Understood, and we'll have that discussion. The exercise tonight is to go through and apply hours, learn from our deficient or. And from there, we'll determine if we have to replace it, make it better, do something different. But the exercise tonight at this juncture was to look at it and apply our standard.
So another inquiry that I've had, a general inquiry, is someone who's interested in creating glamping campsites, like a campground. We have campgrounds in town. I don't know what they were developed under, what type of standard, if it was just state rules, if it was town rules, but I guess this is a more broad question as to where that use would be permitted, and do we have protections based on the ordinance that someone could come in and present a plan under the current ordinance, and it would still be adequate for the protection of the town? A campground, yeah, with the glam ground, yeah.
Glam.
Yeah, and I suppose that really doesn't make a difference as far as,
There's a difference.
the tiny houses and the,
Yes.
yeah,
Structures versus tents.
tree houses.
Right,
There's all.
yeah.
So you do have,
We have a treehouse one in Winthrop, don't we? Or is that in Mona?
oh, really?
It's on an island.
There's one around.
I don't know if it's I don't remember which one. I think it's in Pensacola.
One.
So that in the ordinance, you do have a provision for campsites and
Yeah.
campgrounds.
We do, and it says,
Let me just get to that. So guys,
Yeah, for page 17, it does a planning board for fall district. So if you're doing a campground, it has to come up.
yeah, but it doesn't, we don't really say enough about it. I don't think it is.
Section.
No, I think they're off the model. Can I just say something about parking? When we count parking spaces, do we count the amount of handicap that are required by law?
they're included in that number.
In that count number. So we have to find out, in order to tell them how many, we have to know how many go in a. Different places, it's 2, 3.
Yeah, there's
so
tables
We
that-
have to be aware of how many has to be considering whatever, I don't know its criteria. There's some criteria for it, I know that, I just wasn't sure.
Okay, so we have an application for camp. Where do we go first? Okay.
Yeah, go to page 17, you look at the usage, And then say, okay, we have campgrounds defined, it's defined in the actual camp, the page 60, so whether they call it a campground or campground or whatever the hell they call it. It says, any premises established for overnight use of 2 or more parties for the purpose of temporary camping, including but not limited to tents, recreational vehicles, other shelters. So they call it whatever they want, but it's campground, whatever.
Where'd you find that?
That's page 60,
Oh.
campground. That defines it, so now that we know.
Oh, that's the old one.
What we're talking about is the campground, we go to page 7.
Hold on, I was looking in the new one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back to the old one.
Page 35 and the new one.
There we go. Sorry.
Oh my God, the old one.
Doing the old one. Okay.
One with the red, is that the new one?
Any premises
That's the new one, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so page 30.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the way I would run through this is go page 60, we define campgrounds, says it's a campground. Okay, now we go back to page 17, table 2, land uses outside of water regulatory zones. I mean, Dawn would do this and say, oh, it's coming to the planning board, because campgrounds number 20 goes to all planning board, no matter what zone they're in, it's coming to us. So it doesn't matter where it is. Then you go to page, depending on which one you have, it might be 35, 36, 37. Depending on which version you have, mine's 37, and it says campgrounds. And there's only 2 requirements for campgrounds. So there's obviously state licensing procedures for the following, so we'd have to go look up the state procedures and figure out, because we referenced it right there. And then we'd have to say, okay, you have to follow the state, not only the state has a permit, but you basically say the state licensing procedures for campgrounds. And then we only have 2 provisions. I'm sure in that parking, there could be a lot, that sounds like something,
Fire and all that.
yeah.
Composting toilets versus whatever else the state probably has.
So campgrounds shall contain a minimum of 5,000 square feet of land, not including roads, driveways, roads, land supporting wetlands, vegetation, land below normal high water line, the water shall not be included. So if it's on the water, if it's got a bunch of wet, you can't have a big bog and say that's my campground.
37.
So that's pretty simple. The area intended for placement of recreational vehicles, tent shelters, utilized servicing buildings shall be set a minimum of 100 feet of horizontal distance from the north, so it's the same shoreline requirements. 100 feet from lakes and great ponds, 75 feet from river, streams, and wetlands. So that's all it's emphasizing, is that even though it's a campground, you can't build even a temporary structure within the shoreline zone. And then the only thing they'd be limited to would be their impervious cover, which is set in table, was that 3, which says what their impervious cover area is. If they clear a bunch of area, you're limited.
So shoreline zoning lectures.
Right. I don't know.
And if they wanted to do glamping, typically glamping will do like structures, like decking, and then they'll put a yurt, or they'll have a tent on top of it, because glamping, you don't want to get your booty wet in the mud on the ground in a tent, so you're gonna have,
Well, RVs.
Typically.
RVs are. pretty-
or RVs too, so
If
they.
you included all that, RVs
Yeah,
included.
And like other stuff it would be a structure then, if you're building a deck or something, that's what I would say in my head.
Yep.
So
Again,
we
no
would
matter
go
what,
by,
everything's 100 feet away.
yeah,
And so it would be allowed, it would be allowed to build. And they'd be subject to then you go say they're still subject to our conditional use permit.
mhm,
So page 53, 54, 52, whatever version you have, the 14 factors for application for the conditional factor.
if they wanted to put in
Conditional use factor.
septic or well for
Yep.
bathhouses,
Well,
all that
septic
kind
would
of
be
stuff,
us. Septic would be modern.
yeah, okay.
So we don't approve septics or to do that, but we have.
But the design
Our
of
14
everything,
Our 14 factors, which is, maintaining safe and healthful conditions, whatever that one means, but there's, groundwater protection, surface water protection, and impacts to neighbors is number 13, so. All of those things are factors,
Like-
but they need 5,000 square feet of non-wetland, non-lake, non-water structure. That's good size before they can have a campground.
And really,
You could do it on an acre, but I mean, it's still, you have to have a fairly sizable, you know, you're not one of the postage stamp lots.
Mhm.
I think glamping, you might even have not on the shore. I think you might find it
Hmm.
in other areas.
So
Because the purpose isn't water, the whole purpose is this glamping thing.
I need to look up the state licensing before I.
Yeah.
Because like one of the questions I have is there a buffer required around it? And I know we have the 14 criteria, but if someone comes to me and suggests a buffer, 100 feet, 200 feet, and we don't require a buffer, like, it's so helpful to be able to give them guidance, and I'll see what the state requirements are, but right now I don't really have any guidance to give this applicant in terms of design
So that needs to go,
when they're looking for a property.
they're gonna go someplace.
Well,
Well, it'll be in the state licensing.
the state licensing, and if we write that, we've now written. If we come up and say, this is where I get a little hung up, if we say 50 feet, that means they can build 50 feet, they can clear everything in 50 feet, because we wrote 50 feet. Right now, what we have for rule says very clearly, will ensure the proposed site designs provide adequate buffers and on-site landscaping to protect neighboring properties from detrimental factors of the proposed development. Does that sound like a number to anybody?
No.
Doesn't sound like a number to me.
No,
And it sounds like I can come up with a lot of criteria and say it depends on the location, depends on the type of vegetation. So it depends on, you know, the terrain,
Mhm.
what, how, why and how they're gonna do that. Cause I can think if we put a number in there, that number may not be adequate. Because, and if we.
Or overkill in other
Or overkill.
situations.
Or overkill. If we said, okay, just to be safe, let's make it 500 feet.
but I want that 500 feet.
Well, I mean, think about that. If you got 500 feet on both sides, you're gonna need about 10, 20 acre lot.
Yeah.
Just to have a little tiny campground in the middle,
Yeah,
because 500 feet in either direction is a long, long ways.
yeah.
And that's from the property line. So, I mean, I think that's where I always get hung up with putting numbers in, because I feel like we're painted into a corner if there's a number. For every little thing, we have to go and, oh, we gotta have a number. As Soon as that number's there, now we can't say anything if they wanna put it 50 feet away.
But if we allow them, say 50 feet, we go, okay, 50 feet's fine. The next guy comes in, he says, well, I want 50 feet too.
No, the nice thing about that is because the planning board is a living, it's right in our ordinance. There's nothing that says that just because we gave it to person one, we have to meet exactly person two. They could potentially go and say, oh, well, the town's being unfair, but we have changing board members. We could have different interpretations. We're not being mean to one, we're saying it's a different requirement. Now, if we said 50 feet to one, and then we said 500 to number two, okay, that might be a little bit
I
overkill.
think so.
But if we had for justification for why we used 50 on this one, and then this next one we didn't, oh, well, that's state property, that's state forest land. We're only gonna need 50 feet because they're never gonna develop that. That's why we gave them 50. That wasn't why we used 200.
So they go to appeal, and on appeals, that would come out,
That would come up, exactly. That's the way the process is supposed to
or
work,
not.
or not. But we could write our justification, or they would say, hey, you gave 50 feet to another one, why? Because you were on protected, you were on Kennebec Land Trust, you were on some land that's not
Greg
ever
said so.
developed.
Great
Well,
sense, oh.
You know, I'm just saying, we don't have to be so worried about being absolutely on point consistent, because each case is different.
Well, that's true.
Each use is different.
Yeah.
You know, we're not gonna get Ropers and then Roper two across the street.
No,
And even if we do, it's gonna be a different size lot, different type of terrain, different type of parking and traffic configuration. It's gonna have differences. No matter what you do, it's gonna have differences. So it's gonna be very hard, but again, I don't wanna, I like the idea of a pre-review, that's a good requirement. But I don't agree with trying to put numbers and rules up for everything, because I don't think we can do a good job at it.
Example 3.
And if we did, inviting the lawyers.
I think we're inviting
You
it without
now-
it.
Well, there's no way to stop the lawyers, right?
No.
Okay, just spend,
They got a number now.
they got a number and they can fight on it. Where if we didn't give them that number, then they gotta go with what our thoughts and interpretations were.
Use arbitrary.
Did use that anyway.
Go ahead, next example.
So this kind of relates to the site plan and the use discussion. and I've seen a lot of controversy around kennels. So what would you categorize a kennel as in terms of use and where it would be permitted and with the current regulations? How would you mitigate, so you board dogs,
Oh, that'd be my house.
your
That would
house?
probably I would say
Um,
high impact.
You see a lot of controversy around kennels.
Yeah.
You do, yeah.
Yeah, and
And
people,
the use of, yeah.
the daily daycare, the overnight, yeah, people want those services. They don't want them next door to their home.
They don't want to hear all those barking dogs.
So what do you think, what is the intention now of where they're permitted? And do you feel like, and I'll gear this to you, Greg, but like, do you feel like the way that the current conditional use criteria are laid out, that those could be applied in a way that would mitigate the potential negative impacts from kennel noise being a big one?
Right, we do have a noise ordinance. So obviously, if it's an outdoor kennel where they're allowing the dogs outside, and barking dogs, I think is specifically listed in the
Yes.
kennel. And if you're barking, we call up the police, they have to muzzle that dog or put that dog inside or make that noise stop. Yes, Jamie, that's what it says. The police will show up and give you a ticket for violation of the noise ordinance.
Unless you think it has the same barking
So,
dog.
and that does not have a zoning district.
Isn't there something about if your dog's barking all day long too? Where's that in our ordinance? Isn't
I
there?
don't know if it's.
The noise ordinance, is a nuisance ordinance.
A dog barking all day long is, like, they call it the people to protect dogs. Is that
Who you
not-
call them in
No,
Humane
yeah.
Society.
But I thought there was something, because I remember this, remember when the lady wanted to do the bring your dog and play in my yard thing? Remember, we saw something, because I was like, geez, my dog barks sometimes outside. I'm like in the middle of the day, and there was something else with that too, but I'd have to
My
look back.
neighbor's dog's barking.
Noise.
So would that automatically make it then high impact?
Well, again, well, what are
Where's
their hours of operation?
Yeah.
Probably 24 hours a day. Because they're kennels,
Mhm.
you know, they're likely.
Quarters, yeah. Right.
Hoarding, I mean, you could argue that that's 24 hours a day. There could be noise, so the impact is gonna be probably slight or significant. Size, I'm guessing it has to be a reasonable size, so it's probably already gonna be at least in a medium impact. We don't specify that as low impact. So it's going to have to be something that comes to us that lands in high impact. Which means it's going to have planning board approval, the 14 factors come into play,
Mhm.
and we would have to go down through those to say what the impact. So because we don't specify what a kennel is, where we have to define it, but it is a business. We could say, we're now needing a conditional use permit for that.
Well, what's the, well,
It's not the pond.
my house, it's a good dog.
But
Well, 'cause there's a lot of different things you could do with a kennel. You could have like a dog trainer kennel. You could be a veterinarian with a kennel. Like, there's a lot of different, you could
But
be
if
doggy
you're-
daycare,
If it's commercial.
right?
That to me, it crossed the line from commercial. How do you stop somebody that has 3 dogs in an outside kennel and they're their dogs licensed with the town? I don't think you can say anything except for the noise ordinance.
Yeah.
Because it's their dogs. But if people, you know, if I live next door to somebody that's bringing in dogs that aren't, and leaving with those
Then
dogs,
you
it's
have
like,
to-
oh, okay, wait a minute. Now, that might be hard to prove that they're boarding other people's dogs and that's a business that illegally operating. But that's a whole nother process, right? I mean, that's a different
Unless
kind of,
it's a day one. That could,
but still, if you're paying somebody for services, that's commercial.
right.
So that's just-
The noise that is bad.
No, I'm not worried about the noise. The question is it commercial or not commercial first? I would say if you're getting paid, it's commercial, whether you're doing it legally or illegally, doesn't matter. It's commercial, so then you're, is it low, medium, or high? And you could have one that was low, you could have one that was medium, you could have one that was high, it's gonna depend on the size. It's also gonna depend on the location. The challenge we might have is back on page 17. Where the use is. So if we were to say, it depends on which zone they're in, right? So if it was low impact. And it's in the industrial zone or the rural zone. They could potentially do that with just Mark's approval. That doesn't come to the planning board. If
High
it's
impact?
medium, high comes to us no matter what.
Okay.
High always comes to
Yeah.
us. But just making sure you understand on the table, if it's low impact, it doesn't come to us in the rural zone, village and industrial. If it's medium impact, it doesn't come to us in the village and in industrial. High impact always comes to us.
There is, as I look this up, a license needed for boarding kennels for the state of Maine.
Yeah,
So there's other things that they would have to meet as well through the state of Maine,
not sure.
which would be a million different things that could possibly come up, so.
Well, we have to think about, gotta protect, again, our 14 items, protecting the groundwater. Protect, people are just, oh, it's those concrete pads and they're constantly washing the dog feces off, where's that gonna go? How are you?
In the ground,
composting?
yeah.
Well, those things can
Yeah.
come up, it's a potential source of contamination. So we could discuss that with the applicant, and if there's a stream right there, that would be a problem. That they would have to have some of that.
Hold it into the stream.
Yeah, those.
Another example, John.
People were.
Yes, this was, we had this recently come in with the Roper's application, or Roper's was, bottle redemption. How do you classify that? And where would that be permitted? Because that got lumped in as retail, came in as one use. And retail up to 2,500 square feet was permitted in the village district. But I'm asking the question, if someone came in with just a bottle redemption facility, is that permitted outright somewhere?
Auto redemption show up on
It's not in our definitions, it's not defined, it is defined by the state. The state does define it and has a number of rules in place for it. But that does not necessarily limit, so we would say it's a commercial use. And we'd have to say, okay, what's the impact, low, medium, high? How do we make that classification? Number one, how big is the bottle redemption? The amount of parking it would need, that sort of thing, and that could be a lot harder on a bottle redemption, because they might need a lot of space for bottles. And not a lot of space for people. Or parking, but it's gonna be, so the only place again, if it's low impact, the only place they could do that with just Mark's approval would be in the village, in the industrial and in rural. So if they move that to medium, then it would fall to us. If it's in the rural, in the village and in industrial. And I think we're all kind of in agreement with the idea of industrial, it's noisy, it's industrial. So it would be like, sure, that's why a lot of these things are allowed, because that's why we have a small industrial zone.
I guess as a practical matter, we just had a reduction sample from one building within the last 2 years.
Right.
Was there an application for that?
I'm not aware of the
They
project.
moved from where Roper wants to go.
Yeah,
Across the street,
okay,
whether, Greg's right, if we look at the parking. The amount of parking wasn't huge, the clientele coming and going isn't huge. But Greg, right, the storage of the actual bottles, good size, I mean. You look at it, the back room, either one of the locations I just described, they were all upstairs, downstairs, and out back. So the space for storing bottles for dispatch are pretty big.
there's no clink here in town, is there? Clink usually associated with Hannaford.
Hannaford.
There is a clink drop up there?
At the entrance?
Sometimes they have separate buildings.
I think so, yeah.
So it would be considered high impact because it's more than 2,500 square feet,
So what is it?
Potential.
Or no, that
That's
says
the way it
retail.
says, Retail space.
Right.
So
It's
you
50
have
by
to say,
50, right?
so,
That's got to be 50 by 50. Both locations, I described.
yeah,
Yeah.
easily, but again, the retail space, so what's storage versus retail?
Right,
space
right.
Might have to be a little bit discussed. And they moved over there without coming to us, so I would assume Mark would call that low impact.
Right.
And I think, is that the industrial zone? Anybody, Great Little Paris Farm
I
Union?
mean, it should be,
Yeah, it
If
is.
it's in the industrial
Those are
zone,
factories at one time.
then
Yeah.
it should be, that's what I would guess, so it probably,
because
It-
Paris is
it-
attached to it.
yeah.
Didn't do something with a liquor store attached to it or something?
Yeah, no, the place there doesn't, they had a little whirly
I
gig
just gotta
thing,
find new places to get my.
that little place. Oh,
I'm just kidding. Why, in my mind, I don't know why I thought there was a liquor store attached.
Well, I guess the question pops into my mind is. All redemption been around forever. So why isn't it the definition? Is that because the state controls it or?
There is licensing
Yeah, they have to get.
and everything through the
And some towns do limit the number.
DEP.
And
is
some
what it
states do, some
I'm
towns do
surprised.
limit the number of redemption centers in the town.
Yeah,
I'm just curious why we haven't had it. Why? is it not
DEP is now responsible for licensing.
That could be one of those
Renewals.
that we just never defined.
I
And,
love Google.
you know, but even if we defined it,
Everything.
how would that change our interpretation? It's still commercial. It's still gonna fall into probably one of the three categories. It's still gonna be, so I think everything, you know, as far as our ordinance were covered, but as far as, you know, why don't we define that? Maybe we should, but we don't.
Actually,
Well, we should the state does. Yeah.
I would think so, because we don't.
Where, two different uses, and sometimes they're combined, where if someone wanted to put a car wash. Or a gas station, I assume those would both be high impact. I shouldn't assume, but it seems that they would be,
Gas station, based on the number of customers, that's on that same table on page 60. Number of customers.
25 plus an hour.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it's more than 75 is high,
so this
so.
throws me.
Oh, yeah,
All high impact commercial uses are allowed in the rural districts. And
Does
I,
that make sense?
say that again?
all high impact commercial uses are allowed in the residential district, not in the rural district, which seems at odds.
They have to come to the planning board and they have to meet the 4 criteria, but I see what you're saying is, should we allow all those?
I guess that is, yeah, it seems to me they're all allowed. And if that is the interpretation application, because I've been unclear a little bit, right? Then is that at odds with the comprehensive plan?
I
Rural,
mean,
rural.
I guess you'd have to ask yourself what could be in that high impact.
Like, could high impact be a farm that sells milk and cheese and you have people coming in constantly with a little storefront in their farm? You don't want to stop that. That's awesome. I don't want a Walmart, but, well, I mean, if you
Well,
look
you
at
could
it,
right now.
why not?
Huh?
If they're open for 12 hours and people are coming and going constantly. If you've ever gone to the milk house in Monmouth, people are constantly pulling in. They have a store inside of there where people go in and out, and it's open for 12 hours a day, 6 to 6.
Yeah, farm stand, we came up at the last meeting, I think, the concept of where farm stands.
Well, everything.
I mean, it doesn't look, it looks great. It's adorable and you would want that in your community, right? I feel like that's something, if you ever see it, you're gonna be like, that's great. I would never want to stop that being in the rural area, but there's different things that you might like. Walmart.
Next door to it. Walmart
Yeah.
next door to the farm. Now, picture that. I don't get it. How
But how
can
do
you
you-
not do it? If it's an industrial, how can you not put a Walmart next door?
But I guess if you tried to write that into an ordinance and said, okay, can't have a Walmart in the rural.
No Walmarts,
I mean,
like farms would,
how would you?
I guess that would be different.
How would you write that so that you didn't end up eliminating a lot of the uses that we just talked about?
But you want to, I would think you'd want to eliminate large stores, beyond certain size, maybe gas stations with only they had large areas. You don't want a farm next to a gas station.
Well, again, we have the 14 criteria, we have a conditional use permit, it's
We
high
could say,
impact.
right?
We go through that and we say it's not going to be conducive to the neighborhood.
But like on a corner, there's no gas stations around for 20 miles.
That's
It's
fine.
considered the rural zone.
That'd be fine.
Well, I don't think you can drive more than 5 miles in Winthrop without passing a gas station.
Well, Winthrop, yeah.
Well, we're just talking about.
I guess I just went way out in the country driving around.
Say
I went too far.
The rural district in Winthrop
Yeah,
is, you know, if we have, what are we talking about? If we're development in rural district of.
and there's a lot of wetlands in rural districts.
Yep, and those
So
you're
there's
subject to
lots of
all of them.
streams, everything's near a lake.
Subject to all of that. So it'd
I don't
be
know,
high
I guess we gotta
impact.
see rural.
I see your point, but I would be very careful to limit high impact to say only certain zones.
Yeah.
There are a couple zones that it's not allowed.
That's what I'm saying right now is like what would we be like, oh, no, we said we couldn't do that. That would actually be perfect. And like, I don't know.
So back-
That's what I get nervous about.
Car wash and gas station.
Car wash.
Gas station.
Gas station, two different uses, but sometimes you'll find them
Oh,
together.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but not always.
Okay.
Gas station power, how would that go through our?
Well, those would probably be high impact.
As soon as we moved into high end, not allowed to do that in general residential or limited commercial. It's excluded in our table. But you are allowed to do that in all the other 4 zones, and all of those have to come to the planning board. So we would have to see that. Okay, and then we would be using our 14 criteria to define the impacts.
That works good.
I think they work well, but I'm.
That one does.
That one works, that one would be very,
Yeah, that
Right.
one's perfect.
that one very easy to use our 14
In
criteria.
both cases, car wash and.
Yes, whether it was just a car wash, whether it was just a gas station, or whether it was combined, it would all land in the same spot.
Right. And again, you know, there's,
And they all would be allowed just in those 4 zones, not in the general residential zone.
and then in Maine, I'm sure there's everything through the state.
I'm sure this like.
Probably for both of them, to be honest, with the water
There's
usage
absolutely
and,
is a gas stations.
yeah, there has to be gas
Monitor, there's
stations.
Underground tanks, you have to monitor those, there's lots and lots of requirements.
Other than,
Right? Waste discharge license for
Bulk fuel
storage.
storage.
Case individual.
bulk fuel storage,
So,
like what we have up by Adets.
I can picture what's there.
Are you talking about the
Yeah,
propane?
yeah,
Oh,
no,
the
there's,
tank.
yeah, the tank right up behind Cumberland.
Winter fuel right beyond. the-
Oh, yeah, okay.
Why can't I picture that?
Another, you got the. Down there,
It's the only one I can think of is
across the
farm.
across from,
Yeah,
transfer station, what is that? That's propane, that's storage tanks, right? But
thanks.
Those, that's suburban propane, those are in, they sell
So
the
that's not
tanks,
a
right?
fuel storage.
I don't think so.
Out on 202,
Is that-
across from the transfer station.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what
that's
it's,
just empty tank.
is that,
I don't, I think those are live tanks.
oh, do,
I think
okay,
so.
okay, that's-
You wanna
okay,
dig
okay.
them up, right?
Okay, so that would be, even though there's a lot of small containers,
It's
big.
still,
they have some big ones.
they take the bottles and fill them
Oh.
up.
So
Yeah.
No, this is more drop.
we have an application for a bulk fuel storage area. How would that go through us up?
That might
Where
be
is
a
it
medium
allowed?
impact. Oh, with no sale of gasoline.
That's really
It would be high impact immediately.
So, yeah, yeah, and I know there's heavy state regulations on also.
Yeah.
Start, so that would be same as a gas station, it would immediately have to come to us, only allowed in those 4 zones.
And then you go through the 18.
You go to 14, the 14 criteria.
It's just really hard for me to imagine some of these being placed in the rural district, some of these uses.
And the question is, what's the definition of a rural district? Do we have different ones in our minds compared to what would look?
Well, you have rural zones.
I know, but in my head, a rural district does not have all this busy stuff in it. It's like going up my road. For example, right? That's rural to me.
Well, right now you could have a Walmart
Yeah.
or
I
a
know.
gas station, or, and maybe maybe that is what the town wants, but it seems at odds as an outsider coming in. So I just want to make sure that it's,
That seems
and,
crazy.
and the comprehensive plan says, let's look at this. So you're looking at it.
That seems crazy. That you would do that. Write it in such a way that you could. I mean, why would somebody want to come into this town and buy themselves a little farm, a little place out on the road, and the next day they find out that Walmart's going in? I mean, we're not being neighbors to people coming in when we can't tell them, oh, well, don't worry, this is only rural.
I use the term calculated risk a lot because it's highly unlikely someone's gonna come up your road, put a Walmart up there, but
If somebody showed up with a Walmart, I go, number 13, will ensure the site's design provides adequate buffers and on-site protect the neighboring properties from detrimental factors of the proposed development.
We could,
Good, yeah.
It could,
I think John can put
Mhm.
trees all around it and meet that criteria.
easy, right? So what are we talking about?
I do have to say, I think,
Trees, and there was enough of a buffer, and you didn't know that Walmart was there, why would you care?
so
That's the whole-
if you,
And then that's the point, that they can't buy a big enough plot that'll control the traffic, that'll control, even if you stoplight.
Yeah.
They're gonna need, there's no way to build something like that and say that there wouldn't be impacts.
I think there is.
I'll give you an example, not too far from here, that was farmland. Not too many years ago, that's where they all demolished. And Kohl's
That's right.
and Home Depot.
well,
Really?
I want to say that I think that we're getting shrunk around us a little bit. We have Hannaford, right? That's your first step, is the big grocery store. We've got Auburn Lewiston, we've got Augusta. Walmarts do spread. We are the perfect location in between those two bigger areas to throw another Walmart in. I personally don't think it would happen to 10 years, but thinking outside of that, how would you want to prevent that without saying Turkey Lane, old chicken houses can't be used for steel, like, you know what I mean, or a commercial use, because I think commercial uses do have a place. How do you say, no, you can't build and I also don't think we'd put a Walmart down 135 or up 41. It would be on 202. It'd have to be a busier area. How do you stop that? If it's on
You
like,
don't, you can't on 202. State road. Yeah.
it is.
You could preclude uses. I mean, you could say you don't want retail square footage above a certain size, but
Yeah.
then there's also prejudice, Walmart, Rennie's.
I would love a
You know,
Rennie.
yeah.
I don't want a
So-
Walmart. Give me Rennies. Any day. Right.
I would say,
Is it six? I just have a bunch of them, just trying to get a sense. There's no magic number. Okay,
different. What would that look like?
Sorry, I don't understand what's on.
This whole discussion about our current process
Oh, wait. Oh, you wanna try
and
and.
how it works with different applications.
Right,
But what we, the exercise we just did is going through each one of those.
That's correct.
With our process. Now what I'd like to do is us to shift to the alternative, which Don's been proposing for some time now. And we've had discussions about for some time now. Let's take those same examples and do the exercise with that approach. What would that look like? Now, so far, we've talked about a hybrid that would include a preview. A pre-meeting, like we did with Rovers, like we've done with the solar farm out at Cow Pond Road. Probably others, well, the two that just recently, they ended up that way, the two for replacing their buildings now next to Shoreline.
Mhm.
Those were previews. Or or say we take it, but they were previews. So how, we have that hybrid, whether that's the preview process. Now, how do we take those examples and use the alternative that you're proposing to give you better opportunity to look at applications coming in and helping the client, or the applicant with the process.
Yeah, it's a matter of finding that sweet spot where you're not boxing yourself in, but you have enough protections in place that things are
So let's
more
take the
clear.
first example.
That's.
What ones are-
Well, no, so the one before that, the sixth one, the one before that is the 2,600 square feet of office space.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That was in the general residential zone.
What would we
Because it's-
do to our ordinance, our regulation, our process? What would we do different for that example?
Well, you may have more specific provisions in place in terms of buffering, what buffering consists of, lighting standards, you know, you could be specific as to the height of.
So that- specific app.
Yeah, like maybe looking at the type of lighting that, you know, the height of the pole, if you require lighting in a parking lot, is it gonna be 30 feet or a maximum of 12 feet? What type of a fixture is it gonna be? You could get more specific in terms of the um in terms of landscaping, there's some general statement in the ordinance now that there should be safe access for pedestrians in the parking lot and there should be landscaping. But it pretty much ends there, so you could get more specific with that. It make general statement that you should have some, that it should be addressed, but it just doesn't. So I guess the how could be defined more specifically. It would still give some breadth to the applicants that they would design, you're not designing the project for them, but they come in a little more prepared with a little bit knowing what you're looking for when they come, say, for that sketch discussion.
And like,
Landscaping, the elevations of the building right now, someone could come in with a T111 building, Tyvek siding. I mean, we don't have any standards. Mhm. Yeah,
It'd be kind of like if you're doing a project for a company. You put out specifications, right? They get pretty detailed.
Right.
But depends on the project. I mean, I don't see how you can write one, say it's gonna cover it, but
well, I guess it
maybe it wouldn't be quite as detailed as. I see what,
well, it's a good example, been around a long time, that's McDonald's and Freaker.
yeah,
it's famous. in
I
planning
mean, that's
board, yeah.
extreme, but what does it look like in our town? So, and I think Freeport, whether it's written or not, that's what they did.
Yeah, they did.
They set the expectation of what the building looks like.
Kinda neat.
Okay, let's use a second example. What is a second?
Second one was the glamping campground.
So what would we do different than what we have?
I don't know what the state standards are, if they, and I completely understand Greg's concern about the regulation and penning yourself in, it's to what extent, to what end that you regulate things, that it becomes too cumbersome, too hard to apply. If you put in some formula, it doesn't apply to everyone, then they're not worth the paper it's written on. With the campground, I'd want to, that in that particular example, look at what the state requirements are because we reference them. But did they speak to the design of the minimum standards of the road? I mean, you have to have emergency vehicles accessing, maybe a RV. I think one of those big rigs called, they are RVs, right? The buses, coaches. What's the maximum length of the road and what's the design of the road if you have to get a fire truck out there, maybe that doesn't matter because you don't allow structures beyond a certain point, maybe the state already speaks to that, I don't know. But just some more considerations are on campgrounds. And I'm using that example because that I just had a specific way.
So we have. There's a lot of things around it. Restrictions, allowances, whichever way. But there's some other details out there, we don't have those details out,
Mhm.
without looking at the state piece of. Excellent,
Next one was kennel.
the kennel. What would we do different from?
I don't know where they could go currently because they could be medium or high impact. So they would have to come to the board because we don't have a threshold. It's hard to draw a line. Sometimes the threshold works and sometimes it's, is it 3 dogs? Is it 19 dogs, but they have to be below 2 pounds? Is it? They're the loudest. I had a toy poodle. They are the loudest.
look at the toy.
I feel like a kennel, if I were to look at it, I would immediately say high impact. But
Noise?
I guess, again, it's you interpreting it to how we're gonna, yeah. Like it could be a doggy daycare where it's only there for 8 hours. That would still be considered a kennel.
Well, what if it only has 2 dogs?
Yeah.
They basically are treated almost during the day. They have 2 other dogs, so they're like, oh, okay, I'll take your dog.
Yeah.
I mean, or is it, 1,800 dogs outside with
Mhm.
leashes and dog holes, and just, they're doing a husky training center, or just this massive dog kennel facility.
So there's a lot of state stuff, so maybe that again would be something. The state might even say that already. I don't know.
Right, but I think that would be the size, we would use our table to kind of determine whether it's high, medium, or low impact. Probably likely it's gonna have enough that it's gonna probably fall into medium most of the time, unless it's like 2 dogs. And then from there, you follow the path for what you can and can't do.
Well, the lady that has this, that stereo over there where you bring your,
Right,
let them play, I don't know how many at a time.
one at a time, that was.
Is that one at a-
Yeah, it's one at a time, snip spots, I think she called it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is a real thing?
It's right on Greenwood Avenue.
Oh,
You can walk there.
People that don't have
Yeah.
gated yards, you
Yeah.
can rent time in her gated yard to let your dog run. around.
So, oh,
Yeah.
that's neat.
Yeah.
It's kind of cute, actually.
That's.
I'd be worried about my dog catching
Well,
a really different.
It's one dog, you rent the
People.
one dog, and it's only yours. to
Yeah.
take. So,
Way to make money.
I don't know if you make that much money, this,
She's home doing nothing?
that's true, nothing, this is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they have to clean up the mess their dog.
Yeah, right, she said they have to clean up their own poop.
Feed them. all.
People annoy me, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, you know?
Well, if the dog's a nuisance, you don't let them come
Yeah.
back.
Well, no,
That's your
as
last
long as
visit.
Everybody picks up your dog poop, there isn't any poop in the yard, so it's not a problem.
Unless it's, we don't need to, never mind.
Yeah.
I won't go too deep into this.
What's the next one?
Okay, after kennel, we have the bottle, Deb. And that one was not, that was not defined anywhere.
And seasonal.
It is. But I know the state does have a lot of requirements for it.
Can I ask a quick question to just interject in it? If Dawn had a question on something and it was in between our meetings, would you be allowed to like email the board and be like, I have a question?
You can't take votes over email. You can
No,
arrange
not a vote,
meetings
but to
and,
say, is this something that you guys need to see, or where would you put this? Or is that considered a
Yeah.
vote, like a decision?
that would be
Gotcha.
deliberation.
Okay,
What if you brought it in as other business and said, I have this request to the board, this is the applicant, this is what they want, they decided not to come in and preview. Could you do the preview for them if you public noticed it? Present it
Yeah.
to the board, it would be your interpretation, but it'd be on the record.
like kind of how you just did.
Interpretation of what they're doing, and we could then give you the feedback to help them fill out their application.
Here's my concern with that process is that it would be cumbersome for someone who wants to do a small project. So the comp plan one has directed you to look at potentially having site plan regulations. My concerns along, one, that the ordinance should be able to be read, interpreted, and applied by the average person, right? Like, it shouldn't be so convoluted that, you know, it's not something someone does every day, may take a little effort, but it shouldn't be so obscure that, you know, it takes an act of Congress to decide what it says. So that's one concern that I have. And so if there's that arduous process, it seems like it's too convoluted. And then that the rules need to be clear in advance. They need to be laid out and clear, so that they can be applied equitably.
You're telling me any Joe Public will fill that out? No way, no way. It is all wrong. It has mistakes everywhere. It is incredibly complex. Nobody is building anything in Yarmouth. I'm telling you that right now.
That was the
And that
idea.
would-
That might have been the point.
But I'm saying that there's the example that I am petrified we land on. Something that is overly complicated, cannot be understood, and it's not clear, it's redundant, it's confusing, it has misleading statements. It is,
And again, if you look at Paul says, if you're gonna develop something, we're gonna call it a major development or a minor. And it's gonna be major if it's over, the numbers are gonna go on, like 2,800 square feet and 20,000 feet of 20,000 square feet of impact. Earth moving, very simple, very clear, very straightforward. This is, if you're in here, you're a major, and if not, you're a minor. And it doesn't say campgrounds but maybe that does, I didn't look in their zoning ordinances, I don't know what those might say. But from a site plan regulation, you wanna develop something in Hollow, it's gonna be one of those two criteria. And then they've got, depending on which criteria it falls into, you gotta address
Mhm.
you're incorporating sidewalks that you can get from that business onto the next business, their sidewalks. Lighting, the height of the light poles, those types.
Right, what you described, I mean, what pops in my mind is a window into the process.
Mhm.
And a overview, starts, maybe even a logic diagram, I don't know, where it points you to the appropriate place. Now, we've been using different pieces here to interpret. And maybe what you're doing is that window that gets whoever to that interpretation. So we may be, there may be nothing wrong with what we have, it's how does the person who's trying to use it get to it, figure out where they fit. And there's that window.
Look at the discussion we're having on trying to figure out where things fit.
Yeah.
Thank God you're so well versed in this stuff, right, that you can point to it. Absent you sitting here, I think we'd all be.
Yeah.
Well, but I think, and what you just said is clear, and I'm in agreement that what we have is convoluted. But if we had a simple. Go to page, whatever, I don't know if you want to reference our documents, again, I always worry about copy and pasting.
Sure, yeah.
I
You
know.
know, so,
Hyperlinks,
it can get really weird, so I just paraphrasing here, but. How did we go through the process? First, is it in the definitions? It's defined. Where is it in the book? Go to that section. And then, okay, if it's a commercial use, go to high, medium, low, page 50, 60, 59, 60, or 60, 61, depending on which version we got. Go to, you know, we wouldn't even have to change our ordinance, just sort of a how-to use our ordinance.
So a quick instruction
Yeah, it's
in
instructions
the
on how
beginning.
to.
This is how you
I've
utilize.
seen that on some
Yeah, I
pages.
mean, it's how to. interpret
I
the
would personally love that. If I was outside looking in, I'd be like, oh, thank you, because I don't feel like going through everything.
Right. And the
That
point
would simplify it.
emphasize, which we
User
already-
friendly.
Yeah, it's a
logic.
schematic, it's a step by step, but the other thing is, right now, on every conditional use permit, we require them to write out 1 through 14 on page 53. So if they decide not to put that in and say, oh yeah, we're gonna meet that, oh yeah, we're gonna do that, and then we question them, guess what? They had the questions. They already had the opportunity to fill it out. They chose to be vague and not do it. So we've already told them this is an important piece that we are going to use to evaluate. These are the 14 factors we're gonna evaluate your conditional use permit on. Period. So I agree that, you know, going from page to page is complicated. We have not made it very easy for an outside person. But I think a simple how-to sheet with, and maybe it's just something we generate and give to Dawn and say, we highly recommend you come to the planning board and do a pre-review. If you have a business request, and this is what you would want to do, because what we're gonna use the criteria, is it defined in the manual? Number one, okay, if it is, what use does it fall under? What type of land can you put it on? What impact? Go to the low, medium, high, we define that very clearly, very short little section. What impact level you fall under? Okay, that says what zone you could be in and whether you have to come to the planning board or the code officer. And if you have to come to the planning board, we're gonna use these 14 criteria to evaluate your project.
And if you have questions along the way where you don't know where you fall, come to the
But that's-
planning board.
I would say come to us anyway.
Right.
If you're proposing a project, even if it's small, unless you, it's basically like a Boolean variable, it's a yes, no. You know, let's say it's logic test. You're gonna go down through and say, okay, this is low impact. This is going to be in the village. It's allowed to get the code officer's approval. I go to Mark. Mark interprets that and says, yes, I agree. They're done. They just go to Mark. That's the process, right? Because we gave them the cheat sheet or the directions on how to do that.
Brent, does Howell have architects?
Not in the document that I see from Dawn.
Might be in their ordinance.
But I'm looking at it now, and it's things like building.
Diagram would be good.
Yeah.
Start there, go there.
Building scale.
Yeah, yeah.
And so very succinctly, when large new buildings or structures are proposed in built-up areas where their scale, the size, and other features may be significantly different from the pattern development that already exists in the immediate neighborhood, care must be taken to design a new building or structure so that it's compatible with its neighbors. So it's kind of like the discussion we had in Roofers. And, you know, they showed us the design and it, you know, kind of fits into the area, but if it was gonna be 3 stories and be all glass, I don't know how we would address that. I mean, like, you could look at our 14 performance criteria.
Right.
And make something up. Or you could have something like this, it says very succinctly, you got to design the building that fit in these neighborhood.
Right, and again, that's not necessarily a bad criteria, but what is the existing neighborhood and who determines that is still subjective. So,
Absolutely.
you know, so
Everything's subjective.
well, and that's my point, unless you start putting numbers on it, unless you start putting
Yeah.
facts on it, so I'm fine with expanding our subjectiveness. You know, and giving some guidance if we can find that middle ground. But I'm opposed to putting hard numbers and rules on things because we don't even know what people are gonna propose in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. Somebody comes in with something, don't even know what retail, but housing's on the bottom, the retail's on the roof, and in the middle is where they work.
But you have a
How do you
plan.
do that?
It's telling you what you want to do.
Right, but it's telling us what we wanna do with the new entities. It doesn't have a clue with what it doesn't know. We didn't know solar farms 10 years ago. We didn't know marijuana 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
I did.
Well, okay, just because we know it doesn't mean allow it. We didn't have an ordinance for it, right? We didn't have an ordinance for, we didn't have an ordinance for it, so we would have to create an ordinance for something we don't know, but we have to understand the comprehensive plan is an idea of where we want to be, but it can only be based on what they know. So don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that our process is a process and anything we could do to make it easier, but creating a guidance document would not be a ordinance. It's not an official document. It just says, hey, here's a cheat sheet on here's how to use our ordinance. And it's a guidance document. And we can put in something, well, we can put in some criteria, and there's no reason to say exactly what Brent just wrote. We could quote that and say, we could put our guidance and say, we want it to look like the surrounding buildings. Could they bring it in and say, this looks completely different? Well, we already kind of gave them the heads up that we're kind of looking for it to look similar.
Photos required.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
Rovers did that. They showed us the design, they showed us what we wanted, wanted to see. What is it you're thinking about putting here? So I think we could add a guidance document that's not an ordinance, that's just to help them better understand. And maybe that, we might want to go through that. There could be things we need to add to the ordinance. That's possible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is it. There could be things we're missing. But I think, as soon as you start getting too far down into the details, you gotta address the sidewalks. Well, do you have to pave sidewalks? Or what if there's no sidewalks there? What if it's in the rural zone? You have to add sidewalks to go nowhere. You know how stupid those look? Right? You see them all over the place, but you're just like, why does the sidewalk end there? So you gotta be careful with, you have to have this, or you have to have that. Where judgment needs to come in, you can't have hard and fast rules. So I'm just saying that, I'm just saying the good stuff there, and I don't wanna throw it out. Just saying, can we find a middle ground? And I think a guidance document may be a good solution that helps people navigate the process we have. And if we run that, we may find there are things that we're missing.
Mhm.
There are holes in our system. And I think Hollowell's plan was, had some good points, and I think emphasizing a pre-meeting, we can't require it unless we put it in an ordinance. But we can request, we can let them know that it's helped them in the process.
I think the site and regulation from Hall is about 20 pages. I certainly encourage
I think it's
everybody
worth-
this week.
Yeah.
I think it's
To just
worth,
go take it,
Right.
and
yeah.
Where do you find that on their website?
it was one of the
You
links
can
on.
text it directly to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to
Instead
send
of
it?
sending that whole long one, I'll just
Yeah, I
send
missed
just
that
the,
somehow.
And read it in context and be thinking about the 6 examples that Don went through tonight and how those might apply to.
Right.
do you want a hard copy or?
Plan review? Is that it? Chapter 9, sub-plan review, okay.
I get rid of things.
Hard copy?
And I suggest, we talk about this a lot,
Internet.
spend a lot of time on it. And I suggest that make an attempt at creating a roadmap.
A roadmap.
Can I suggest we try making a roadmap for you now?
I was just wondering, she was chugging at him, so it made me laugh for laughing. You mean, we're talking about the guidance document of how to apply to so that the most casual of observers can figure out how
I'm
to,
not talking about details,
Mhm.
I'm talking about how to get to the,
yeah.
road. How do you get the farm here? The
I can-
state way to do it.
I can come up with something. I don't know.
No, I
If
think
it'll
we
be-
should create, I think we should have a subcommittee, if folks are willing, we should have a subcommittee and we create that.
And I say we
You're part of that
simplify
process.
it.
Mhm.
So we create that.
I reached out to the attorney about noticing requirements. We had talked about that for subcommittees, and I haven't heard back from him, but I did scout around online and I see that other towns are posting when they're having subcommittee meetings, there seem to be held in public spaces. My question to him partially had been, if it's just a discussion for recommendations purpose and it's only 2 members, does it have, could it be at a coffee house? Could it be at someone's house? Does it have to be, at the library, the town hall, or just to know what all the options are for convenience sake? Just waiting to hear.
Maybe one of these 2 meetings. Or
Yeah, the library also has a good,
get away. from
Well,
this.
I mean, for it
Get
just,
together is not the purpose of planning board, and you just happen to go in the same place. That's not a meeting,
Mhm.
but if your purpose is to have a meeting, then that's when you're in trouble.
Right.
Because it has to
This is
be,
a subcommittee meeting to design that process for. So what's the number of limitation?
subcommittee.
well, the number limitation could be if I just write it and send it to everybody on the committee. Say, here's my draft, and then we discuss it at the meeting,
Okay.
then we don't need anything.
You wanna go have a beer, we'll go.
Yeah, that's.
Forget the planning board, we'll have a beer.
So,
The golf course discuss it, you gotta fight the public option, pay for that.
so Brent, at some point.
yeah, we should definitely notice
You
it.
talk about getting a grade. Discussion.
Yeah,
Are we close enough now that 2 could do that?
Well, no, we can't do it as a meeting, because like Betty's saying is that if we're actually specifically talking about, well, I don't know, I guess I gotta.
I think it's more than 2 members is considered,
Purpose.
isn't it more than 2?
Is your
But if
purpose to have a beer?
But if the purpose, yeah,
More
the
than 2.
purpose, the purpose was actually, if I write this on my own. And I send a copy to Brent and ask for his input and happen to get some feedback, that's not the same thing, and then we would present the draft. To the planning board
What's wrong with that?
in a public forum, so then nobody's surprised of where that came from. That's something that you could say, well, that can't be disallowed, that's something that happened.
Well, help me understand, Don and I did the maps, right, Joel, we met right here, we did that several hours. Is that a meeting?
Was it could have been a subcommittee. I've not worked with subcommittees
We're
before.
not-
That was the question I had to Phil.
Chairing debate.
Yeah,
So we're in violation.
I don't know the answer to that. You met in public, whether or not it was noticed or needed to be noticed was the question.
that's on the maps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You weren't
If we'd have had public meetings, it would have never got done, because it was hard enough to get the 3 of us.
If you can do it, the question is the noticing requirement in my mind is just, my question to Bill was, what is the noticing requirement ultimately? Where can they meet, in these circumstances, and what kind of notice do we need to give?
So also.
Phil being the attorney.
The vulnerability is somebody filing a lawsuit that we violated meeting rules.
Calculated risk comes to mind
I
again.
mean, the other way to get around this, okay, so if I wrote up some specifications. Sent those to a member of the planning board to say, do you feel these are ready to be shared with the planning board? They may.
One person?
Well, if I send it to Rick's our chair, and said, are these at a point where we could bring these up to the committee? And say, are these, and he says, yes, no, and I think you should do some more work on it, I'm still confused about X, Y, Z. I add some more justification, we agree that they're ready to be presented to the board, they're presented, they're noticed, and they're presented to the board. As a draft guidance document, there's no way you could argue around that because it was done by me. And I was just asking the board chair, is it able to be presented?
The way it's wrong is that I said to you, let's go have a beer and discuss that. That is where you're setting up a meeting outside, inviting nobody else.
Right, but if it's a meeting of me, I don't need to reference that. I'm meeting
We
with
don't need to
myself.
put everybody on notice to come to your house on a,
Well, I'm not.
Tuesday
it's
night
not
when
in
you're
my
working
house.
on it.
Just me.
No,
I'm
exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
drafting it, and then we'll
You're
get-
not,
Yeah, yeah.
that's allowed.
you're not a meeting.
I know, exactly. Otherwise I'd be in trouble.
I think that would be fine.
I had something, but yeah.
It is fine.
I guess I thought we were talking about a subcommittee of multiple people.
Well,
That's
we
what
were
I was
talking
inquiring.
about
about.
the- If you're saying we can't do that,
No, we can't.
then
You can do it. I just was waiting back to hear back from Phil on the noticing
I
requirements.
think it has to be where you do it, maybe.
well, you
I
can.
feel like, how hard could it be to lay out a map of the? It shouldn't be that bad.
Exclude, you can't be.
Right, I don't see the point. I mean, if Greg doesn't mind doing it, I don't see the point of going through the whole rigmarole for a subcommittee.
You just hold it. That, Greg, go ahead and do that.
I think it's a good idea, Greg.
Share it. Yeah. That's agree.
I mean, I have to have it done by what, Friday, so she can notice it?
It's gonna be your next, whenever it's available, I'll put it on the next agenda when it's available.
No
So
rush.
use your timeline. You're a volunteer. You know, if you have time to do it, as soon as it's available, I'll just get it on the next available agenda.
Yes.
I can just put it under other business. I'll just put it under the other business. It's a workshop item, so I'll put it.
It's still draft.
And if it's,
I mean,
and if not available, we'll just
Sounds good to
move
me,
it to the
Greg.
next agenda.
Okay,
Done.
Okay.
Yeah. Dawn, remember that?
Roadmap, Winthrop ordinance. I like it. Like I
Jim, you
said,
still
road-
there?
Jim fell asleep.
You know, I mean,
Alright.
I
Who's
I
doing the
was thinking
roadmap?
earlier that he hadn't participated in,
Yeah.
he voted on safety.
he,
Yeah.
yeah,
You know-
but this discussion, I wondered.
When
if it
I'm
was-
Zoom stuff, sometimes it's just easier to stay quiet and not say anything, because when you try to interrupt, you're just like,
Yeah.
oh, it ruins the whole conversation. So I just-
Oh, just to review. We've done the exercise, I think we've done. Said we have 6 examples, and walk through our process, and then attempt to do it through an alternative. I think we've done that. And now we're saying, Greg, you go ahead and do a logic diagram. How you get from an applicant to our regs. The process is, somewhere in that process, how do we fit into a preview? If necessary. Or makes sense. And then look for any holes, any holes in that process that we need to go fix. It isn't easy to get there, obviously there's something wrong, we can't get it. That agreeable?
Agreeable, all in favor?
I guess my question is, you do the logic diagram. And we see how that goes. If we come up with something that you can't point to anything because it isn't there, would we put that in the ordinance then? That's what I would think.
I think we would, if we were gonna say we wanted to match existing structures or the
Right.
character of the area, I would think at some point, if we wanted to mandate that, we'd have to put it in the ordinance. We can't, I mean, a guidance document is a guidance document, but again, we've got number, which is pretty open-ended. We could put a guidance explorer, how that could be interpreted,
Mhm.
and maybe that is an example, but we wouldn't be able to hardline enforce it. Because it's actually written into that site plan, which is part of their ordinance, right? That's a required act they have to have. So there may be items that we do want to add to the process, but then we would have to add that to the ordinance.
Right. And that's what I'm saying to the board, we figure that out.
What, right, that's kind of what I was thinking, the process may help us define that. What that might look like, and I'll look at the Hollow one in more detail. I think I kind of lost my head when I was reading the article. I could not believe that was a published document. I just could not believe it. I said, if I was a developer, I would take them to court today and they would lose hands down to say this is not comprehensible and you contradict yourself and you're not even clear. But
I had a good idea to get rid of Walmart. Okay, so.
she's back on that. Yeah.
Properties over a certain amount of size, whatever, view shed analysis. If you see it from Mount Pisgah, we don't like you and you can't do it.
Right.
No?
Okay,
Anyway.
I go.
I like that one.
I got for other business. So Dawn asked, sent out us our table with the highlights from the comprehensive plans. And she said she wanted us to take a look at that was a sheet with like the blue column.
Mhm.
So I started doing that, but we're not asking for conclusions. I'm not doing that now. What I would ask us all to do is limited. The absolute maximum I'm willing to do as a planning board might be 4 or 5 things this year. I am not willing to be an administrative arm for the town and try to tackle all of that. That's completely unrealistic. So I would say we all pick 5, see where it lands, and we probably try to pick the top 5.
All right,
Or 4 or 3 and say we prioritize
which
them,
one is
and
it?
that's what we're going to do.
So the 2 work items for the next meeting will be that,
Right.
and the other one is
Well-
reviewing the logic. Yeah.
I want to highlight too, Greg, that table, it has planning board delegated as one of the authorities. Some of them, it's just planning board, and some of them, it's you and the conservation commission and the town manager, or, you know, so it's not.
Which,
Yeah.
which table is this? Was this in the email too, or this is in?
Yeah, the highlights.
It's in this ordinance, but I just had pulled it out and
Oh, did you give it to us today? I did not get it.
not today, I
Oh,
didn't,
last time I
but I
wasn't
think I
here.
have an extra copy.
Oh, okay.
Okay, any other? That's all right.
Okay,
Let's open up people.
Your comments, though, I was gonna actually.
I can copy
We overlay board.
206.
And there is quite a part of my.
Pull this together, is that what you
And
did?
if we can't do it,
Hmm.
some of that. Outside.
Make a
confines
picture of
of
it with my
these
phone.
buildings, This building in front of the public is never gonna get done, so.
I can just,
That's the reality.
Let me just have a copy. I'm just trying to listen at the same time. I'm sorry. Let me have a copy.
That now what we got?
Well, the solar ordinance, I wrote
There you
it. I
go.
wrote the entire ordinance and presented it to the board.
where did we take that from? Didn't we take it from somebody?
I made it.
Here, thank
I,
you.
there's a little, it's on there. but
Okay.
This is fine.
I didn't share with us.
Thank you.
Next meeting is.
Select 5 is what you were.
We actually only have one meeting scheduled in November because the other one conflicts, or it's like the day before Thanksgiving.
So one meeting. So
One meeting, today was the deadline. It's November. November 6th, is that what?
No,
someone said?
13th,
No.
second Friday, or second Wednesday?
Second Wednesday.
Yeah.
So right now, the deadline was today. So both YMCA and 169 Boot Cove submitted additional information as follow-up to what you requested at the last meeting. So those 2 items, I have to go through it and make sure that it's all there, but they've indicated they've submitted
they
the
return the
additional.
application. Or they've indicated what they're ready.
They submitted copies, the copies of it.
Is it possible? You know, it's a limited enough. Some of it is it possible to do any of us who walk through both of those.
A walkthrough of the property?
Hmm.
Yeah, let me look at that.
What's the limitation?
I have different feelings about individual site walks than some attorneys. In keeping with what you just said about nothing would ever get done. You know, an attorney might say, you know, they're gonna have to defend you in court, only go as a board, don't go individually. But the reality is, if you can swing by the property and take a look at it and not have, you know, outside discussion and fact finding on your own, if you just look at it so you're familiar with it before you come to the property, I think that's helpful, but I think also our attorney would say it's not a good idea, because you could be discovering, yeah.
It's tying our hands.
It's a private road,
That was.
so going on a private road is also kind of awkward to do.
Those a group are not at all.
So I
I think it's worth it to see. I didn't walk down there being creepy. I walk on my own road every single day. And when you see the house, you can see where they can't move it back. So in my head, when I was looking at it, and you guys asked, why can't you move it back? In my head, I'm like, you can't. How would you do that? You'd be digging into a. I don't know if you'd want to though, when you see it, right?
It definitely.
No. That's not what I meant, but
doesn't it smell cigarette smoke or cigar smoke? It smells like something burning.
it does smell like.
Why does the whole board have to go? If 3 people constitute a quorum, why can't 3 people? go?
You can have a quorum. If you want me to try to set up a sidewalk beforehand, I could do that.
Or you could all just go for a walk with me on my street. my street.
But
Doesn't
don't-
sort of trespass.
Point on main campus stuff. You look at
You
it,
just look.
right, and there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think a lawyer would find it. They probably try,
I think it depends on the situation, but what you have before you, the applications you have before you, I would think it would be helpful to the applicant if people had
yeah,
direct familiarity with what the lay of the land was. If you wanted to go and have things flagged and have discussion in the field, different thing.
But
so,
we can't go on their property, right?
Well, if they
Right, bye.
invite us, if Dawn calls them and they say, fine,
I'm trying to remember on the application, usually in the application, they give you permission. I don't believe we do have
would you
that.
take into
Well, the
your-
YMCA, oh,
You
sorry.
take into your. If there's a desire, I don't know how many want to do. I know Dawn and I do.
I put that in the process. Do you approve of planning board members coming and looking on your property to familiar? You know,
I'll double check because it may already be on the application that when they sign it, they acknowledge that. Let me check on that.
and once they give their permission, I think. Oh, you
Now, the Y would be harder to get to. Because you can't drive down through all the,
go on.
that would be different. That you need permission from them.
Sign the application there.
Well, I look at it, if somebody says, no, I don't want anybody coming and looking.
Well, but if I already signed it, they've already signed it.
They're hiding stuff. Got a good example right there.
Or you don't want multiple people stopping and leering at your house, because that's weird.
So.
I'd rather have a set time, like, all right, I know they're coming, I'm not gonna hang my underwear out with a clothesline.
If it's already on the application,
Not that I do that.
the application's there, they say, I don't wanna sign this, Dawn would say, okay, then we're gonna do a site visit and it'll be at a certain time. Right, that would be, if they're willing to sign it and willing to accept that, and if you go by yourself, it said it right in the training we just did, if you go by yourself, and it was hard to listen to with all the ums and everything else, but. You missed that, it was a lot of fun, yeah, oh yeah, 400 change ums.
I have a link to it now, so you can rewatch it.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's what I wanna do. It was the worst presentation, oh, it's on, anyways, I should.
But the chili was great.
Yeah, 17, yeah. If they're unwilling to sign that on the application, then you'd say, okay, we need to schedule a site visit then. And that would be all the boards invited, the public's invited, it'll be at this time, this one, notice it.
Ugh.
Well, they have two options.
Yeah,
They can't say, oh, no, we're gonna hide this and not show it to you, and then not bring any pictures. Because we're gonna be like, we're not gonna approve this until you show us what the pictures are, what you're doing. You can't say, oh, I'm gonna do some stuff, but not really tell you, it doesn't work like that.
That's
so
interesting.
now we're looking at the police.
yes, so is it the YMCA one or both of them?
Oh,
Both, okay.
Yeah. the
based on the discussion that we do both.
Well,
Landed property.
so I also have two others that came in today. One is 95 Woodlawn, which I believe you were on the board. They was within the last year, because it was when I was here, but they're coming back. It was a shoreline permit. I can't remember why they stepped off, but they've come back. I have them on my desk. And then
That was a
Turtle
while.
Run.
Yeah.
Turtle Run. Actually, I have the Woodlawn right here. Turtle Run is a subdivision application. They want to do a conversion to condominiums of rental units, I believe. Cabins.
That you know.
Buddy, so
Cabins. The individual cabins, those gray ones. Is that the one?
that must be.
Just reading
uh,
it. 77 Turtle Run Road, condominium conversion, existing dwelling and operational units,
Yeah.
22 units.
Oh, it's Lakeside. They want to convert that to condos?
22 units within a motel structure converted into 11 larger dwelling units. So it's no, there's no, my
That's a
understanding is
lot
there's
of-
no.
Oh, this is-
It's the
there's no
motel.
permits, It's conversion of ownership.
2 floors, conversion of ownership too?
So that it's, well, they could all be owned by one entity, but they want to make them separate taxable units that could be conveyed.
It's interesting because that property's not even paid off.
Um,
How are you gonna
Yeah.
sell condos to
Yeah.
somebody when the property's not paid off?
Currently, well, I'm thinking off the top of my head, I had a conversation with them like a year ago when I first came.
Because we've never allowed that in Sunflower, the law, because they're don't conform with our standings. We can't allow them to subdivide because it doesn't conform.
No, what they're talking about is the motel. It's the one big huge building that's 2 stories.
Yeah.
That it is like 10 feet from the shoreland. literally. It's the big, long rectangular building, not the little cabins off to the side. Papacy Conti,
Down there where the
Lakeside Motel and
Grey
Cabin.
Goose is and.
Oh, right there.
Behind White Duck.
Oh, yeah.
It's the big motel that's literally right on the water. Huh?
The condo?
They're not condos. They're individual, small.
We're gonna turn in yellow. Okay, it's the, okay.
They wanna-
Right, the marina, yeah.
They want to
Like
change it
individual
from
units.
motel rooms to change it into condos, which would take a massive amount of change inside of those buildings.
To rent or to sell.
Well, that's
Which would be
interesting.
more
So
than,
this is what I have. I haven't, I literally just put it in the bin before I came in, but it's that skinny.
my uncle
this.
built that motel,
That's
so I
all I
know
have.
pretty
So we'll
well.
see if it gets on the agenda or not.
Yeah.
Enough
Yeah.
information.
Okay, so, we definitely have to.
So there's 4 items. I have 4 things in the bin that could potentially be on the agenda. 169 Boot Cove YMCA coming back, 95 Woodlawn coming back from even further back, and then this new potential subdivision application. So I'll be looking at those. And then not tomorrow, but the next couple days.
The desire, some of us, at least. some of us, That wanna do site visits.
I think they're great. It's good to have the things flagged in the field. So,
I mean, I was told there's a big rock in the way. What I was proposing to fix the problem. I'd like to see the big rock.
I bet you Barry could move it.
Yes, probably. Okay, so any other,
Legal say on that, on the visitation. I was just,
I haven't asked our attorney Phil on that.
I've seen it, yeah. I've
It's that whole,
done differently.
if you corner someone, ask him, he's gonna have to.
Yeah, I think I should do it.
I just I don't see how it could be a problem. Somebody just drives by on a road. You can't,
You can't stop,
right?
can't stop anybody driving by. That's no different than looking at it on a map.
Yeah.
Free information, you're all allowed.
Step on their property.
Yeah, you don't get out and start peeking in their windows and
Well,
stuff.
there's
but-
nothing-
Yeah, just driving by though.
nothing.
You wanna do a thorough site visit, look at the details.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Want permission
And
to enter
we've
the
done
property.
that, they're giving you permission when they put in the application, and they say, you're giving the planning board, they're not giving the town, they're giving the planning board permission to walk on their property and look at what they're proposing.
Right.
And if they've signed that, they've approved it. If they have refused to sign it, that's where I said, we should do a scheduled site visit. So that's their only 2 options. Their 2 options are, 1, they sign it on the application, or 2, they do a scheduled site visit. They can do either, but they can't do a project without us being able to see it. They can't say, you can't step on my property.
Right.
That's not reasonable.
However, I don't think that means that each individual can go there and say, I want to see that. If
you don't mind asking.
not at all.
Really, I'll.
Well, Betty, I did, program just approved this, within the last 2 months, I did that.
I
I'm
would,
not gonna make sure he's going to
or he could have told you something else.
Because
I used to do it all the
I
time.
was so, it's right.
I've done it probably half a dozen times.
And I'd knock on the door if they were there. and Usually they come out, explain what they're gonna do. and-
Yep.
I don't think everyone should be able to go there separately, dear God. That's
I'll
control.
entertain a motion to adjourn.
That's what I'm sure.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I make motions to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you. Don, when you make that.
Thanks, Stuart.
Print one.
For Ken.
But it's not
2
this
on
time.
the thing.
I'm not going to be,
I was just thinking
there's a few
about.
of these that I'm
I'm
like,
not- I've gone in January and almost killed
I
myself.
know, yeah.
I'm not doing it.
I'd like to make that red.
That's all you need.
So Don, did you know I will not be here, I will be in Alabama. Next week.
Yeah.